The galaxy was full of voices, but in that time, silence carried more weight than sound. Two mighty empires were preparing for war, their fleets hidden in deep space, their soldiers restless, their leaders filled with pride and fear. The Galactic Council, a union of many races, gathered to discuss peace, but not a single one wanted to mediate, not a single one wanted to stand between the two giants. Everyone knew what would happen if someone tried. The empires did not believe in peace, they believed in power. If a weak race tried to mediate, they would be crushed. If a strong race tried, they would be challenged. So the council, made up of hundreds of alien species, chose silence. They watched the storm grow and they hoped it would pass without consuming them. On one side was the Valor Dominion, ancient and cruel, their fleets stretched across hundreds of systems, their war machines unmatched. On the other side was the Keshar Alliance, younger but hungry, ambitious and filled with rage from old wounds. The two powers had fought before, and now they were ready to fight again. This time, the galaxy feared there would be no end. In the chambers of the council, voices rose. Many smaller races begged for someone to step forward. "We need a mediator," cried the Sarn, "a fragile insectoid race. Our colonies will burn first," wailed the Karanth, scaled beings whose home sat between the two powers. But the elder races turned their heads away. No one dared to speak. No one dared to offer peace, for in the great library of galactic history there was one lesson all knew. Mediators die first. Those who stood between fire were burned. Those who tried to speak reason were silenced. And so the chamber was filled with silence, a silence louder than war drums. Far away on a blue and green world on the edge of the spiral arm, Earth listened. Humans were still called newcomers. A young race, often mocked for their short history in the stars. They were not invited to speak at the council. They were not given much respect. But humans had ears and humans had memories. They remembered what it meant to be ignored. Earth had not forgotten its own history. Wars where small nations were trampled by empires. Battles where voices of peace were drowned by the noise of guns. Humanity had learned the cost of silence. Humanity had learned the price of fear. In hidden shipyards, Earth's fleets were not silent. Massive carriers rested in orbital docks. Colossal dreadnoughts waited in the shadows of asteroids. Fleets of cruisers trained in secret. While the galaxy mocked Earth for being young, humans had prepared. They had built ships not for show but for survival. They had built weapons not for intimidation but for necessity. And still, Earth stayed quiet. They watched the growing storm. They listened to the cries of the small races. They saw the pride of the empires. Humanity waited, not because they were afraid, but because they understood timing. The first sparks of war lit the stars. The Valor fleet struck a border system of the Keshar. Cities burned. Millions died. The Keshar answered with fire of their own. Soon, entire sectors turned red with destruction. The council did nothing. They sat in their chamber, pretending peace still existed, but whispers grew. Small races sent secret messages, searching for help. Some messages reached Earth. They were not official. They were not loud. They were whispers, desperate and weak. Yet humanity heard them, and humanity remembered its own whispers from ages past when no one listened. The leaders of Earth gathered. In the silent halls of their own council they spoke. They weighed risk and cost. They debated fear and courage, and then slowly they reached an answer. "No one wants to mediate," said Tichas. He president of Earth, her voice calm but strong. "Then we will." "But they will not listen," said the generals. "They will mock us. They will threaten us. They will fight us." "Then we will show them," the president said, her eyes fixed on the stars. "We will not speak with empty hands. We will speak with strength." In the shipyards, alarms sounded, engines roared, hulls shone under the light of distant suns. The Terran fleet awakened, not for conquest, not for pride, but for survival, and for a voice that could not be ignored. The galaxy remained silent. The empires prepared for slaughter. The council turned away, but deep in the dark, engines of humanity thundered. A new mediator was rising, not with words alone, but with a war fleet unlike any the stars had ever seen, and soon the silence of the galaxy would be broken. In the far reaches of the galaxy, Earth was still seen as a small world, a quiet planet on the edge of the spiral arm. To many alien civilizations, humanity was nothing more than a young race, inexperienced, reckless, and without the long history of the elder empires. The Galactic Council often looked at Earth with polite smiles, but behind those smiles there was always a shadow of dismissal. Humanity was not invited to lead discussions. Humanity was not trusted with high positions. When the Council debated matters of war and peace, Earth was given a seat, but not a voice. The human delegates sat in silence, watching the elder species talk over them. It was a cruel irony, for the Council believed that Earth was too fragile, too unimportant to take part in decisions that shaped the galaxy. Yet the very same Council now sat paralyzed, unable to stop the fires of war. The Valor Dominion spread their claws across system after system. Their fleets moved with ruthless precision, entire planets forced into submission. The Kishar Alliance answered with their own fury, sending strike groups into Valor territory, burning colonies, and claiming revenge for old wounds. To the galaxy, this was a conflict of titans too vast for anyone to interrupt. But in the shadows of forgotten space, Earth was preparing. While the galaxy ignored them, humans had been busy. For decades, engineers had worked in secret shipyards hidden in the asteroid belts of Sol. Docks were constructed around Jupiter. Ship foundries operated in the Kuiper Belt. Terran scientists poured everything they had into building fleets that could one day defend humanity from extinction. It was not arrogance that drove them. It was memory. Humanity remembered being underestimated on Earth itself. Times when small nations were crushed because no one came to help. Moments in history when their voices were too weak to be heard. Those memories had shaped the human spirit. They knew that in a galaxy full of giants, silence could mean death. So they worked, quietly, tirelessly, until their fleet stood ready. Even now, as the first sparks of war spread across the stars, Earth stayed silent. Officially, the human government did not interfere. They listened to reports. They watched as the council spoke in circles. They watched as races cried for help, and no one answered. To the elder powers, Earth's silence was proof of weakness, but to those who truly understood humanity, it was proof of patience. Whispers traveled through the void. Small civilizations, desperate and afraid, reached out to anyone who might hear them. Many messages were lost, others ignored. Yet some reached Earth. They were filled with desperation, begging for intervention. Humanity's leaders read them in silence. Each word reminded them of their own history, of the times when no one answered their cries. In the great chamber beneath the surface of Earth, leaders of nations gathered with admirals and generals. The galaxy thinks we are too small, one said. They believe we are weak, another added. Perhaps it is time we remind them, answered the president of Earth. Her voice carried the weight of 1,000 years of human struggle. Still, there were doubts. The generals warned of the risk. If we step forward, the empires will not listen. They will laugh at us, they will attack us, they will call us arrogant. The president's eyes did not waver. Then let them laugh, she said. We will not speak with empty words. We will speak with strength. We will show them that humanity has learned the cost of silence. Deep in the shipyards, the order was given. Engines hummed, reactors awakened, and titanic hulls lit up with energy. The Terran fleet began to move, hidden no longer. They stretched across the void like a storm gathering on the horizon. Massive carriers, dreadnoughts, cruisers, and escorts, all designed with one purpose, to protect humanity and to make sure their voice could never be ignored again. The galaxy did not yet know it, but the balance of power was about to change. Earth, once mocked as a forgotten planet, was preparing to step onto the stage, not as a weak newcomer, but as a force that no one could silence. The humans had been patient long enough. Now their war fleet was ready to break the silence of the stars, and in that silence the galaxy would soon hear the voice of Earth, a voice forged from history, pain, and survival, a voice that carried both peace and fire, a voice that could not and would not be ignored. The war grew louder. Whole sectors burned under the fire of the Valor Dominion and the Kishar Alliance. Civilian colonies were destroyed, trade lanes turned into battle zones, and the cries of the weak echoed across the stars. The Galactic Council sat in its grand chamber, yet it did nothing. Its members argued, blamed one another, and waited for someone else to take the risk. No one dared to rise as mediator. The smaller races were the ones who suffered first. The Sarn, insectoid beings with fragile wings, saw their border colonies turn to ash. The Karanth, reptilian and proud, watched helplessly as warships crossed their skies. The Aelari, a gentle race of scholars, begged for protection, Their pleas fell into silence. The elder species, with all their pride, looked away, for they had learned one thing through history: the mediator dies before the war ends. In secret, desperate leaders whispered among themselves. If the council would not answer, perhaps another would. They sent encrypted messages across the void, signals meant for anyone willing to listen. Most were lost in the chaos. Some reached smugglers, others reached mercenaries, but a very few, found their way to Earth. On Earth, the messages were read in silence. In the hidden war chambers beneath the planet's surface, generals and admirals studied them carefully. They were short, desperate, filled with fear. "Help us," one message said. "We are dying," said another. Humanity listened. Humanity remembered. The president of Earth stood before the assembly of leaders, her voice calm yet unshakable. "No one wanted a mediator," she said. "The council has chosen silence. The empires have chosen destruction. But these voices have chosen us. Shall we turn away as others once turned away from us?" There was silence in the chamber. Every leader remembered humanity's history. Moments when their own ancestors cried for aid and no one came. Times when they were small and ignored. The memory burned in their blood, and slowly, one by one, they nodded. "The empires will not listen," warned an admiral. "They will laugh at us. They will call us children." Another general added, "If we step into their war, we may ignite their wrath." But the president's gaze never wavered. "Then let them laugh," she answered. "Let them rage, let them threaten. But when our fleets stand before them, when our ships block the fire, they will understand that humanity does not come with empty hands. We come with strength, we come with memory, we come with fire." And so the decision was made. The Terran fleet would answer, not as conqueror, not as servant, but as mediator with power. Humanity would step where no one dared to step, not because they wanted glory, but because silence had already killed too many. In the shipyards of Sol, movement began. Carriers left their docks, dreadnoughts glided into formation, cruisers and destroyers followed in endless rows. The black of space filled with Terran steel. Engines roared like thunder, and as the fleet prepared to jump, messages spread across the stars. For the first time in history, small races heard an answer. "This is Earth," the message said. "We have heard your call. We will not stay silent. We are coming." Hope lit in places where there had been only despair. On the shattered colonies of the Sarn, survivors whispered that humanity had spoken. On the burning worlds of the Corinth, soldiers raised their heads. On the silent halls of the Ilari, scholars wept. For in the dark, a new light had appeared. Yet the empires mocked. When word reached the Valor Dominion that Earth intended to mediate, their warlords laughed. "A child race," they sneered. "A planet of dreamers." The Kashar Alliance smirked with the same arrogance. "Let them try," they said. "We will crush them with a single fleet." But neither empire truly understood. They had seen human merchants, human explorers, human diplomats. They had never seen the Terran war fleet. They had never seen the true face of a race that survived against all odds. As the Terran fleet prepared its first jump, the galaxy held its breath. For the first time in countless years, someone had answered the call for help. Someone had dared to stand between fire. Someone had dared to take the role of mediator. And soon, the galaxy would learn what it meant when Earth spoke, not with empty words, but with fleets that could shake the stars. The war had grown into a storm. The Valor Dominion struck deeper with every attack, turning planets into rubble and leaving trails of fire across the void. The Kashar Alliance answered with fury, bushing convoys, destroying starbases, and vowing that no Valor ship would survive. The galaxy watched with terror as the two giants ripped each other apart. Yet no one dared to stop them. The council still sat in silence, waiting for a miracle that would never come. But far from the council chamber, in the black silence of space, something was moving. Across the Sol system, the Terran warfleet stirred. Ships that had been hidden in shadow now turned their bows toward the stars. Carriers released swarms of fighters for drills. Massive dreadnoughts tested their weapons. Cruisers formed wings with perfect precision. Humanity had chosen to act, and the dark was no longer silent. On alien long-range sensors, strange readings began to appear. At first they were ignored, dismissed as static, but soon the signals became clear. Entire formations of ships were leaving Earth's system, thousands of war engines moving together like a tidal wave. The whispers spread quickly through the stars. Terran ships are mobilizing, one report said. The humans are gathering a fleet, another warned. The council dismissed it, laughing softly. Earth is too small, their fleet is too weak, said one elder species. But as the reports continued, the laughter faded, for the numbers did not lie. Humanity was sending a fleet larger than any seen in centuries. The Valor Dominion was the first to react. Their warlords gathered around glowing maps of the stars, sneering at the data. So the children come, they said. Let them try to mediate. We will crush their ships and send their world into fire. The Kishar Alliance echoed the same arrogance. Humans believe they can speak for the galaxy, they mocked. They will learn what happens when dreamers step into war. Yet the smaller races whispered a different story. To them, Earth was hope, fragile but bright. They had sent their desperate calls into the void, and Earth had answered, "The humans are coming," whispered the Saran refugees. "They carry fleets of steel," muttered the Karanth soldiers. "Perhaps the silence will finally be broken," prayed the Alari scholars. As the Terran fleet crossed the void, commanders held their breath. Every ship carried not only weapons but the weight of history. They were not moving for conquest. They were not moving for empire. They were moving to speak, but to speak with strength. And then, in the dark between stars, the moment came. Sensors across the galaxy lit up with warnings. In the neutral zone between the Valor Dominion and the Kishar Alliance, new signals appeared. At first they were faint, but then they grew. Hundreds, then thousands of warships emerged from hyperspace, engines blazing, hulls gleaming under the light of distant suns. The Terran war fleet had arrived. The sight shook the galaxy. It was not a handful of ships as the Council had imagined. It was an armada, larger than any coalition had ever fielded. Carriers stretching across the void like floating cities, dreadnoughts so massive they cast shadows over moons, escorts moving in perfect formation. The humans had revealed their hand, and it was a hand of iron. In the council chamber, silence fell. Elder species stared at the images with disbelief. "This cannot be," one whispered. "They were supposed to be weak." Another gasped. But the truth was clear. The forgotten planet had built a fleet that rivaled empires, and now it stood in the very center of the war. The Valor and Keshar fleets moved quickly. Each empire sent ships to challenge humanity. Arrogance drove them forward. They believed Earth would retreat. They believed humans would falter. But in the dark, the Terran fleet held its ground. A message echoed across the stars, spoken in clear and steady words. "This is Earth," it said. "The war ends here. You will sit at the table, or you will face us." The galaxy trembled at those words, for it was the first time in history that a so-called young race had spoken to giants without fear. It was the first time that silence had been broken, not by diplomacy alone, but by the thunder of warships waiting in the dark. And though the empires laughed, though they mocked, somewhere deep in their hearts they felt it. A warning, a truth. Humanity had stepped forward, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. The arrival of Earth's fleet sent shockwaves across the stars. Images of the Terran armada spread through the networks of countless species. Some refused to believe it, others whispered in awe, and many trembled, for the truth was undeniable. Earth had stepped forward, not as a whisper in the council, but as a roar in the void. The Valor Dominion responded first. Their warlords sneered at the sight of human ships. "They bring toys," one commander spat. "We will shatter them like glass." Orders were sent, and a fleet of Valor battleships entered the neutral zone. Their weapons charged, their intent clear. They would drive humanity out before a single word of mediation could be spoken. On the other side, the Keshar Alliance prepared their own test. Their leaders laughed among themselves. "Let the Terrans try," they said. "We will remind them that the stars belong to the strong." They sent their cruisers forward, sleek and fast, ready to cut through the human fleet. The galaxy watched with breath held. In the council chamber, elder races whispered nervously. None dared to intervene, but none could look away. For this moment would decide if Earth was a voice or an echo. Inside the command deck of the Terran flagship Sol's Resolve, Admiral Reyes stood tall, her eyes fixed on the endless wall of hostile ships closing in. Around her, officers reported calmly. "Enemy fleet approaching from Valor space," one said. "Kesher cruisers accelerating to intercept," another added. Reyes gave no sign of fear. She only raised her hand and spoke. "Form the line. Hold steady. Let them see. The Terran fleet shifted with precision. Carriers moved to the rear, releasing waves of fighters that spread like sparks in the dark. Dreadnoughts pushed forward, their cannons glowing faintly. Cruisers and escorts locked into formation. Every movement was exact, every position chosen with care. The fleet stood not as scattered ships but as one living machine. The Valor fired first. Plasma beams cut through the void, smashing against Terran shields. The Kishar followed, their torpedoes streaking toward human ships. Explosions lit the darkness. For a moment the galaxy believed humanity would fall, but the Terran line held. Shields absorbed the storm, armor resisted the fire. Then, with a single command, Admiral Reyes answered. "Return fire," she said. The void erupted. Terran cannons roared with thunder. Missiles streaked across the black. Fighters swarmed like blades of light. A Valor battleship took the first hit, its hull tearing apart in silence. A Kishar cruiser tried to dodge but was caught by a missile barrage, bursting into fragments. One by one the enemies fell, and the Terran fleet advanced. What shocked the galaxy most was not only the power but the discipline. Humans did not waste a single shot. They did not scatter in panic. Every strike was measured, every move coordinated. They fought not like a young race but like an ancient one that had studied war for centuries. On the council screens, silence turned to disbelief. "This cannot be," whispered an elder race. "How do they fight like this?" muttered another. But the truth was simple. Humanity had fought wars when they were weak. They had learned strategy when they were desperate. And now, with strength in their hands, they showed the galaxy what survival had taught them. Valor commanders shouted in rage, sending more ships forward. Kishar captains pushed their cruisers harder, but the Terran line never broke. Dreadnoughts unleashed barrages that tore through eye hulls. Fighters cut down enemy interceptors. Missiles rained like fire. And when the smoke cleared, the Valor and Keshar fleets that had dared to challenge Earth were in ruins. Admiral Reyes stood unmoved, her voice calm as she gave the next order. "Hold position, signal the Empires." A message was sent, clear and steady, echoing across all channels. "We came to mediate, not to conquer, but if you will not listen to our voice, you will listen to our fleet." The galaxy trembled at those words, for they carried no arrogance, only truth. Humanity had spoken, not with empty words but with fire. And now, even the mighty Valor and the proud Kishar could no longer laugh. In that moment, the forgotten planet was forgotten no more. Earth had stood in the center of war and had not broken. Humanity had shown that their strength was not a rumor, not a dream, but a reality. And though the war was not yet over, the galaxy knew that a new force had entered its stage, a force that would no longer be silenced. The destruction of the first Valor and Kishar fleets echoed across the galaxy like thunder. The images of Terran warships tearing through mighty armadas spread to every corner of the stars. Some races cheered in secret, others trembled in fear. For all understood one thing now, Earth could not be ignored. But the empires were not ready to surrender. Pride burned hotter than reason. The Valor Dominion declared that the humans were arrogant children. The Kishar Alliance called them reckless fools. Yet behind their words, their leaders were shaken. They had underestimated the young race, and now their thrones trembled. Still, they believed in their numbers. They believed in their strength. And so, both empires prepared to crush humanity with their full power. In hidden star bases, Valor commanders gathered their reserve fleets, thousands of warships, larger and stronger than those lost before, weapons capable of turning moons into dust. On the other side of the void, the Kishar assembled their own massive force, sleek cruisers, battle carriers, and experimental dreadnoughts armed with weapons no one had ever seen. The two empires, enemies to each other, now shared one thought. Humanity must be broken. The council watched in silence. Some members begged to stop the escalation, but no one dared to speak loudly, for they knew that if the Terrans failed, their fate would be no different than those already burning in the fire. If humanity stood strong, perhaps hope remained. If they fell, then the galaxy would belong only to the strongest and most cruel. Inside the flagship Soul's Resolve, Admiral Reyes received the reports, her officers' voices steady but tense. "Multiple enemy fleets detected," one said, "combined strength far greater than before." Another added, "The map of the stars glowed red with enemy signals, stretching like waves ready to drown the Terran fleet." Yet Reyes showed no fear. She looked at her people, Then at the image of her fleet outside, thousands of ships waiting in silence, and she spoke. They want to test our will. We will show them what humanity's will means. The Terran fleet prepared. Carriers deployed more fighters, squadrons spreading out like wings of fire. Dreadnoughts charged their main cannons, their hulls glowing with energy. Cruisers shifted into defensive walls. Destroyers aligned their missile pods. The fleet stood ready. Every captain, every pilot, every soldier knew the truth. They were not just fighting for Earth. They were fighting for every race whose cries had been ignored. The enemy arrived with fury. Valor battleships roared into range. Kashir cruisers flanked from the shadows. The void filled with light as plasma beams, torpedoes, and missiles poured toward the Terran line. Explosions ripped through the dark. For a moment the sky looked like fire, but humanity answered. Admiral Reyes gave the order, fire, and the Terran fleet unleashed its sea. Torm. Dreadnought cannons tore apart Valor hulls. Missiles streaked into Kashir formations. Fighters weaved through enemy squadrons, striking with precision. The clash shook the stars. The Empires believed their numbers would crush the humans, but the Terrans fought with discipline no one had expected. Every formation moved as one. Every strike was timed. While the Empires screamed in rage and chaos, humanity fought with calm steel. Again and again, enemy ships fell, explosions marking the void. Still, the battle was far from easy. Terran ships took damage, shields flared, and hulls cracked. Pilots gave their lives in fire. Destroyers were torn apart by overwhelming firepower, but not a single human ship retreated. Not a single line broke. They held the formation with unshakable resolve. Then came the turning point. The Valor unleashed their superweapon, a beam that split apart an asteroid the size of a mountain. They turned it on the Terran dreadnought Iron Spear. The beam struck, ripping across its shields, tearing armor away. Yet before the ship could be destroyed, a wing of Terran cruisers moved forward, sacrificing themselves to absorb the strike. Their hulls shattered, but the dreadnought lived, and with fury it returned fire, blasting the Valor supership into silence. The Kashir made their move next. Their experimental dreadnought, sleek and dark, slipped behind the Terran lines, its cannons ready to pierce the flagship. But before it could strike, a swarm of Terran fighters surrounded it, cutting through its defenses in waves. Their sacrifice was terrible, hundreds lost, but the giant ship cracked and fell, exploding in silence. Hours passed and still the battle raged. Yet slowly the tide turned, the empires began to falter, their ships scattered, their formations broke, while humanity still stood, battered but unbroken. Admiral Reyes gave her final command, advance. The Terran fleet moved forward as one, cutting through what remained of the enemy. The void was filled with burning wrecks. The proud Valor and Kashir fleets were shattered. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. The empires who had sworn to crush humanity now limped away, defeated, and humanity stood, scarred but victorious. Admiral Reyes spoke one last message. We do not come for conquest. We do not come for empire. We come for peace. But know this, if you will not listen to our words, then you will listen to our will. And across the stars, races whispered a new truth. Earth had faced the fire of giants, and Earth had not fallen. Humanity had shown that their will was stronger than pride, stronger than silence, stronger than fear. The battle was over. The void still burned with wreckage, shattered ships drifting like broken bones across the stars. The proud fleets of the Valor Dominion and the Kashir Alliance were in ruins. Their arrogance had led them into fire, and that fire had consumed them. But the Terran fleet still stood, scarred but unbroken. Humanity had faced the wrath of giants and had not fallen. Across the galaxy, silence reigned. Every race, from the smallest colony to the oldest empire, watched with wide eyes. For they had just seen the impossible. The young world, the forgotten planet, had stood against two titans and lived, and not only lived, but forced them to retreat. It was a moment that would be carved into galactic history forever. The Valor warlords gathered in rage, demanding revenge, but their fleets were broken, their soldiers scattered. They had no strength left. The Kashir rulers shouted for pride, but their voices trembled, for they knew another battle would end them completely. Both sides were forced to face a truth they hated. Humanity had the power to destroy them. Humanity had the power to end the war. In the council chamber, the elder races looked at one another with disbelief. For centuries they had dismissed Earth, treating them as a child among giants. Now they saw that the child had grown, and the grown child carried a sword sharp enough to cut the stars. Some were afraid, some were humbled, but all understood. Earth could no longer be ignored. On the flagship Sol's Resolve, Admiral Reyes stood tall, her fleet stretched out around her like a shield of steel, her voice carried across every channel, clear and calm. "This war is over," she said. "You will sit, you will speak, you will find peace. If you refuse, then you will face us again, and next time, there will be nothing left to save." The message echoed through every system. The Valor tried to roar in defiance, but their fleets were ash. The Kashar tried to smirk with pride, but their voices shook. At last, both sides gave the same answer, a single word, heavy with defeat. "We will listen." And so, for the first time in decades, the warlords of the Valor and the leaders of the Kishar sat at the same table, not because they wanted peace, but because they had no choice. And at the head of that table sat humanity, the mediator no one wanted, the mediator no one believed in, the mediator that arrived not with words alone, but with strength no one could deny. The talks were long, the voices bitter, but the Terran fleet waited above, a silent reminder of what would happen if pride spoke too loudly, slowly, painfully. Agreements were made, lines were drawn, colonies spared, trade restored. For the first time in years, hope returned to the stars. The smaller races watched with awe, for they had cried out for help, and only Earth had answered. They saw humanity not as conquerors, but as guardians. A race that carried memory, a race that carried scars, and a race that refused to let silence rule. The Sarn wept with gratitude, the Karanth bowed their heads in respect, the Iolari whispered prayers of thanks. All across the galaxy, the name of Earth was Spock. And not with dismissal, but with respect. When the talks ended, the galaxy had changed. Humanity was no longer a shadow in the council. They were a pillar. They were a voice that could not be silenced. The forgotten planet had become the new mediator, not because they asked, but because they proved. On the bridge of her ship, Admiral Reyes looked at the stars, her officers around her, tired but proud. "It is done," one whispered. She nodded slowly. "No," she answered. "It has only begun. Today we mediate, tomorrow we watch, and forever we will be ready." And so, the Terran fleet remained, not as conquerors, not as tyrants, but as guardians in the dark. Their engines burned like watchfires across the void, a warning to the proud, a hope for the weak. Humanity had spoken with strength, humanity had forced peace with will, and from that day forward, the galaxy knew a truth it would never forget. When Earth spoke, the stars listened. When Earth stood, the empires trembled. And when Earth mediated, the wars ended. For humanity had become the voice between silence and fire, the new mediator of the galaxy, the race that changed everything.